Happy Tuesday, YouTube. Happy Tuesday, everyone. And today's topic is, for anyone who doesn't know, a few years ago, around, I think, 2008, there were a series of murders of women sex workers in the Ipswich area. And it was understandably very difficult for that community. And it was, of course, very big in the media here in the UK. And I only just recently found out that a couple of years ago a London musical started about the case. And they're now making it into a film with an actress called Olivia Colman, who you may not know her by name, but she's in a few British shows. She's in Broadchurch, for example. So the film version is going to be reasonably high profile at least. And this, of course, I mean, you can make a musical about very serious things. In fact, there always used to be. And you can say that some popular musicals, well, Les Miserables is about serious things, but it's a long time ago, and the actual characters are themselves fictional. This isn't just a stage and screen adaptation, it's a musical about a community who, within the last few years, went through, well, encountering this serial killer. Now, I actually was curious enough to play some of the soundtrack and to read up on it a bit. The lyrics are done verbatim style. In other words, they've taken actual interview quotes to make the lyrics and tried even to be true to the meter of it and things like that. And the defense, I suppose, would be it's more about the community coping and rebuilding. They don't actually show it isn't like a sort of I'm stabbing you kind of song moment. But I think that the question is, I mean, obviously this kind of debate often comes up of when do we censor art? Should we ever censor art? In this instance, is it disrespectful to the memories of the people who were killed? I'm not actually aware of any complaints by the relatives that survived them, not from the research that I had time to do. But is it ever okay to have something like a musical about real-life serial murders? Koki?
Well, I've heard that comedy is tragedy plus time. It could just be lacking a critical ingredient here. Though, I think that there's some stuff that will probably never be, well, funny. And it's not supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be, a musical. But what I mean to say is that these are still some fresh wounds, and maybe the musical can handle it very even-handedly. But, you know, it's something that you have to be careful about, I guess is what I mean to say. Especially when it's something that happened so recently.
Yeah. Fratis, your thoughts?
I think, first of all, the murders were in 2006. He was convicted in 2008. That's important for my opinion, because, I mean, it's nearly 10 years ago, and that gives me an important question. At what point is it okay to start, making media of it? Is it 10 years? Is it 15? Is it 50? Is it 100? And that's an important question. I think different people would answer that question differently. But I mean, even with saying, okay, it needs to be some time between when it happened and when we're going to make stuff out of it. There's lots of other pieces of media, I'm going to say, which are very stabby. Just think of Evita. I mean, Evita is a very, very famous thing, and it's about a bloody coup in Argentina. I mean, this specific one has even been done as a TV series on the BBC called Five Daughters.
Okay.
Which was actually about the murders, not about the community. That's my last point. That this show is not about murders. It's about the community dealing with those murders. And I think that can be an important and very good thing to do and very good thing to film. It can even be helping for the community, I think, in a personal sense. Showing that the community can deal and will survive and will continue and will grow out of it. So that's just my opinion. I think.
Now that you mention it, I did see at least some of that series, and I think it did show due reverence. I think it was respectful. I suppose the problem with a musical is, even though it's not a comedy musical, a lot of people have a problem with what approach you take tonally, and that there's a kind of extra issue of appropriateness. I mean, Evita kind of has its upbeat moments, and it's got its satire and its irony at times. And yet it's about real life things, but it's also about more distant history. Although I suppose, actually, I think the musical was originally written in the 70s. I'm not quite sure.
I think it was mid-60s, and she got cooed out of office in 52.
Oh, okay.
And then there's Sweeney Todd.
Well, those weren't real murders.
I thought they were based on at least real murders.
Well, I suppose it's kind of folklore loosely based on some real events, but I mean there wasn't actually a barber called Sweeney Todd, and those victims aren't real people. I do take your point, although again that's a Sondheim opera from the 70s about the late 19th century, so to whatever degree real, I think it's again a big distance. I don't know. I would say a more accurate, a closer comparison would be if it was a Whitechapel's murder musical, where at least you could say Jack the Ripper was 100 years earlier. And obviously, I suppose part of the question is it depends how much one thinks one needs to consider the community, who I suppose that the people of that part of Ipswich. I didn't find anything that said they were in uproar. Maybe they appreciated it. Maybe it was they found it respectful. Maybe even thought it was cathartic. But Midnight, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I do. You were talking about the time frames of Freitas. Now in Canada, we had Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. This was a married couple. Paul Bernardo turned out to be the Scarborough rapist. And he had, I believe it was over 50 rapes in under a year and a half. And as well, he murdered 2 girls, as well as his wife's little sister, after doing, you can imagine what he did to them. The man's in jail for life. The closest thing that Canada has to a death sentence, he's got. And I'm not going to dox myself by say where I'm living. But let's just say I was close enough to be scared.
Right.
So if somebody came out, and this, we're talking, late 90s, okay? Because I lived through that terror, I would personally, I'd be like in an uproar if they did something about that and glamorized it in any sense.
Well, I mean,
I do agree it could help. I do agree that it could help the community heal, and I am aware that they're not dealing with the actual crimes or anything. But I just remember, being scared all the time, and, no one ever traveling by themselves and, stuff like that, because Paul Bernardo is incredibly sadistic and incredibly terrifying, and nobody knew who it was for the longest time. So I just know, having been on the flip side of that if there's a very tenuous line. And it's almost like you have to make sure that you're doing your balancing act properly, because if it's done well, it can heal. But if it falters in even one adaptation issue when it comes from the play to the movie, it could harm a lot of people. And that's my concern. Like, if the play has been going for a while and that has been okay, my concern is when stuff goes from theater to video, movie, it tends to be over glamorized and overdone because that's what people want when they go to the movies. So there's just this line where they could, not saying intentionally, but they could, hurt the families at that point.
Yeah, I mean, having heard some tracks but not seen the stage version, I can't entirely vouch for it tonally. This is where musicals, I think, are tricky. As you say, it's gauging it exactly right. Where, in a sense, I would say I do detect a sort of dark humour from it, but at the same time, it's very serious. It's sort of a bit difficult to explain. Some people would just, because I think you say musical and people think, as you said, glamorous. People think, although that's actually, in fact, we've already discussed several examples of very dark, very gritty musicals, and they can be very intelligent. They can be very insightful. I think this is aiming to use the medium of the musical for social comment. So I'm kind of on the fence. I think that the film. I'll admit I'm very interested in the stage version. Probably if I'd known about it, might have considered going to see it. But I'm 50-50 as to whether the film will. I think it'll either work or it won't. So anybody have any closing comments?
I'd like to actually jump back in. I mean, it very much depends. I mean, what I've seen of the choices of actors, they've picked very solid, very good actors. They've picked people who are mainly stage actors, who tend to be very good as actors, especially as drama actors. I mean, I think Tennant was picked as one of them.
I didn't know Tennant was in it, but that's certainly Olivia Colman, who is Tennant's Broadchurch co-star. Maybe they put them both in, so that sounds pretty solid. Yeah, if it's Tennant and Coleman, and yes, well, something with them in it, I'll definitely watch.
I mean, that's one of the things. At least they're picking actors that tend to be very good in their roles.
Yeah,
and tend to take their job very seriously, which does give me hope that that it might work out. I mean, it very much depends on what they're going to frame it as. I wouldn't say I'm 50-50. I mean, it's a BBC production. The BBC tends to be, how does one frame it in a good way? Very careful in what they do.
Yeah.
Because they're much more open to complaint and they have to act much quicker on complaint than other media.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm going to say I'm more than less than 50-50. I'm more like 60 or 70, 30, 40 or something. I'm going to say I have a good feeling that it might turn out quite well.
You're confident in the project?
I'm somewhat confident. I mean, just the BBC producing it, which, like I said, tends to be a very careful thing. The actors they've picked, the actors they've picked, and a few other things is just I just could see it working quite well.
I think when we've seen it, we should do a show discussing it, having seen it, which could be in several months, of course, I'd imagine, because I think it's going into production now. So, who's up for that?
Most definitely.
Yeah,
I love serial killers with the bizarre passion. So.
Okay.
Can I just say that Freitas's optimism now makes me optimistic? I hope they handle it well.
I hope they handle it well, but with Freitas mentioning that the BBC tends to be on the more careful side, which is not a bad thing, I'm just thinking they could go too careful and still hurt people because of the way they're portraying them falsely, to be too careful, you know what I mean?
I think so. You can have... you can have one extreme, or you can have the other.
So I think when we look at that, I don't think so. I mean, the BBC is famous for its dramas. I mean, some of the best drama series in the last 10 years have been BBC productions. So they're very, very good with drama stuff, or at least the TV series. I don't watch a lot of BBC movies, to be honest. But I'm going to assume they're just as good at doing movies as they are series, at which point I have a great amount of trust in their dramaturgic performances. They've been very good. I mean,
they've definitely produced a lot of good drama series and one-off dramas, and I'm trying to think, I've definitely seen films produced by BBC Films before that I've liked. But yeah, BBC is still, what would be the word, a badge of quality. Maybe not as much as it was once, but it still is. They definitely have integrity. And yeah, I think probably they wouldn't have picked the topic if they weren't confident. Obviously, this is something that's been on at the Old Vic. It's had a theatrical success in London, where obviously there's a lot of theatre people. So, yeah, I would imagine, certainly share your confidence that there'll be a lot of thought behind this. They've not chosen this project on a whim. So yeah, anybody else with anything to add?
Just that I really hope they're careful with the tightrope that they're about to start walking on.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. One thing that I hope they address, because one thing that I remember at the time, which was an offshoot of the whole discussion and kind of the whole media thing, which was the media talking about the murder of prostitutes being murdered, and some critics saying, "Could you please say women? Can you please say women?" And obviously, you know what some of the scummy press in the UK are like, to the point of you can phrase it in such a way as it's not quite murder, he's kind of doing a public service kind of thing. And actually the police themselves, being very careful, always say women. This is not about the murder of prostitutes, this is about the murder of women. And so because I remember that sticks out in my head, and again, that's a topic you've got to approach properly. I'm curious to know, because the musical is verbatim from interviews, etc., if that's actually something which I might listen to the whole soundtrack at some point. If that's something that they really go into, because as far as I can recall, that was obviously this was as Fratis says, it was 8 or 9 years ago. But as far as I recall, that was quite a big part of it. Actually, that's kind of its own avenue. I'll open up the floor to comment on that issue.
Repeat that last bit.
Oh, well, simply that the issue of if somebody's murdering women who are sex workers, in the UK, a lot of the media want to report it as the murder of prostitutes.
Well, yeah. In Canada, we actually had murders of, in Alberta, we had murders of Native women who were prostitutes. And the police didn't really do much until the white woman had been killed. And during the trial, one of the police officers were asked, why didn't you do anything? And he said, well, it was just another Indian.
Right.
And so I think, whether it's prostitute or in Canada calling them, the Aboriginal just natives, like they don't matter, I think it's a way of dehumanizing them so the person feels more righteous about themselves, the one who's writing it. I've always found that people who refer to murder victims by their either by their ethnicity or like their occupation are people who are trying to make that person look bad and themselves feel better for their superiority. I have a good job writing for a newspaper, and she was just a whore on the street,
Right.
Go ahead, Corky.
Okay, I was going to say, it's interesting that you bring up, the kind of classism elements in it, race plays into it, and also prostitution, sex work in general is seen as a very sort of low-end job. I'd say that another angle at it is just sort of the puritanical sense that a lot of people have, that this is kind of the punishment you get for pursuing this kind of lifestyle. While we wouldn't, I don't think many people would go to the extreme of saying that this is a service Though, actually, yeah, a lot of people would. But, I think that the consensus is that most people wouldn't say this is a disservice. But I think a lot of people would like to validate, their own, I guess, notions of purity by seeing horrible things happen to those that violate it.
Mm.
I think my angle would have been a little bit of a different one on the story. I mean, the question is, or as far as I read on the story when I started doing a little bit of research into the murders themselves, is that it kicked loose a little bit of a discussion on prostitutes itself. Should it stay illegal? What kind of things should we bring up and stuff like that? And I think a discussion like that, especially in England, would be very productive. I mean, in Germany we had that discussion about 10 years ago now. I think about 10 years ago, and we've since then went and legalized prostitution.
Right. And have people been safer as a result?
Yes. There's been multiple studies on this, that after prostitution was legalized, crime rates went down. In all nations that have done this, by the way, it's not just Germany, it's Holland and Austria.
Okay.
In all the nations that have legalized prostitution, crime rates go down, the safety and health of the sex workers goes up. It has a lot of very positive things. And obviously, in Germany at least, we also tax sex workers, just like a normal job. We tax them.
Right.
So, you get paid, they pay a tax, but they also get all the positive things from a taxes.
Okay. Well, if it's if it's proven to work, it's proven to work. Unfortunately, people seem not to think this way. That they want, it's like France going over to the Swedish model, and but
personally, I think the Swedish model is awful. But
exactly, yeah.
Completely different topic.
Well, all right. But what I'm saying is that things being proven to work in practice never seems to translate into the minds of the people who make the decisions.
Well, the strange thing is, since we've legalized it, it was actually in 2002, we legalized it. We've had sex tourism now. Now we actually have sex tourism, which is, problematic in other ways. I mean, Amsterdam has a terrible problem with sex tourism. Germany, certain regions of Germany are starting to have a huge problem with sex tourism. And I think, and now the European Union is also discussing making the Swedish model the predominant model, or the European legislated model, which is just how did you frame it yesterday on Monday? With the I can't remember the phrasing you used, but that's how addled my brain is. The oh dear moment.
Oh dearism.
Yeah, it's an oh dearism.
Right, okay. Well, what's the most harmful thing to Germany about sex tourism?
I mean, sex tourism brings in, it means you have very large bordels, in some cases very small communities.
Right.
With a lot of frequency of people who are questionable. I'm going to say questionable. Questionable social standard. Which is a bit of a problem for small communities in some cases. Usually border communities to different countries.
Yeah, okay. But does it bring in a lot of money?
I've never actually found anything about that, but I'm going to assume yes.
Freitas, since it's been legalized and you're having the traffic from the like the sex tourism, has child predators gone up at all, or has it gone down?
As far as I know, from the one study I've seen on that, it's gone down. But I've only ever seen one study, and the rate for that was a very small look at a very tight time frame. So the question is, if you had a look at a longer time frame and looked at it more exactly what it would be, I cannot tell you.
Because my concern with sexual tourism is it gives more opportunities for predators from other countries to come and, prey on small communities.
Usually these things are very well policed. At least I know in the towns I've lived in or the cities I've lived in, those areas of city are well policed, or in some cases even owned by legalized crime, as we had in my city for a very long time.
Right.
So
I mean, I see it. I mean, I'm thinking of this as being like drugs. If it's illegal, if it's in the hands of criminals, it's in the hands of criminals. It's done criminally. So so then that's when you probably I can see how, because it takes the business away from sex traffickers and what have you, that pimping an underage girl would actually, for example, would actually happen less. Also, what if, because I did hear of a case, I think it was in the UK, that a guy had been in a brothel, had noticed there was an underage girl there, and he reported it, but he didn't report it straight away because he was scared to admit, well, what were you doing in a brothel? Whereas if you're not ashamed of the fact that you were buying sex, then you'll be more ready to come forward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as, like, let's say someone goes into a brothel, starts a fight in a brothel, and if brothels are illegal in that country, it's very hard for the owners of the brothel to, just call the police. So they have people ready to do violence in the brothels to kick those kinds of people out or keep them away, which, doesn't work very well.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So, anyone have closing thoughts?
By the way, we've just found a number on how much money it's made. 14.5 billion euros in sex trade annually.
Wow.
So it's a huge industry. And, I mean, the German taxes, we love that. I mean, 14.5 billion euros, that's a shit ton of money.
Yeah. Wow. Well, on that bombshell, it's good night from Cokie.
Have a good night. Hamster prosperity.
Good night from Fartis.
Good night. Go to more brothels.
Exactly. And good night from Midnight.
Good night, guys. The chickens are still safe.
Hurrah. And it's good night from me.